Discover 7 amazing Stoic lessons that will transform your life, surprising secrets revealed. Jake Thompson sat on the edge of his grandfather's attic, surrounded by shadows and dust, inhaling the stale air that felt almost heavy with regret. Amidst the forgotten relics of a life well lived, he unearthed an old trunk that seemed to shimmer with a glimmer of hope. Inside, the grimy pages of Stoic philosophy called out to him, promising unlikely transformations. But as he scanned the titles, his memories mingled with the scent of mildew, reminding him how invisible he felt as a teacher in Maplewood, a faded relic in a world that no longer valued the passion he used to pour into each lesson. At 38, Jake had sunk into the gray comfort of mediocrity. The once bright flame of teaching flickered weakly, smothered by student disinterest and administrative indifference. Doubt crept in like ivy around a forgotten building, constricting his spirit. What was the point of pouring himself into his work when the students occupied their phones more than a textbook? Adding to the turmoil were the overdue bills that piled up like his dreams forgotten, gathering dust. As he flipped through the yellowed texts, uncertainty churned in his stomach, just as it had after each disheartening parent-teacher conference. Jake hesitated. Was it time for a change or just wandering thoughts clinging to desperate solutions? The principles of Stoicism stirred his heart. He had a vision, a school project that could wake the apathetic halls. Yet, doubt nagged, festering with worries about the backlash. What if he was dismissed once again? Throat dry, he forced himself to imagine students ignited by compassion and action. That image melted the moldy weight of despair, but just as quickly, the fear returned. What if he failed? What if his efforts were just another embarrassment? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let us continue. The project, however, became a beacon of light amidst the darkness, breathing brief life into desolate classrooms. Yet the energy turned to ash when the administration quickly shot down his plan. It was too radical, they said, not aligned with traditional values. Their words stung like bitter ice, shattering his hope with cold indifference. Anguish washed over him, igniting a war within. Should he fight for this fleeting passion that had stirred the stagnant air, or back down to keep the stability his family relied upon? Each whirling thought collided, dragging him deeper into despair. The echoes of his grandfather's teachings loomed large, resilience amidst struggle, yet even that wisdom turned bitter when faced with his own fears. Jake paced through his living room, muscles tight and breath uneven. Voices seeped from the kitchen, his mother and estranged brother wrestling with their financial burdens. Tension hung between them, thick and unresolved. As their resentments surfaced, they struck deep within him as well. He felt torn, suffocated by a legacy of conflict, guilt gnawing at his determination to rise above the limitations that history imposed on him. The stakes grew heavier, his heart racing with a storm of anguish. He found himself at a precipice. Could he confront the administration, risking everything he had built, or suffocate under the weight of complacency once more? The clock ticked ominously toward the school board meeting, each second tightening its grip around his resolve. Could he genuinely redefine what it meant to be a teacher? Would he face the obstacle that loomed, or would he slip back into the shadows where he had dwelled so long? The hour approached, the distant hum of the school board meeting embedding itself within him like a persistent drumbeat. Jake stared at his reflection in the hallway mirror, the dim light casting an unforgiving glare on the lines etched into his forehead, lines that mirrored years of disappointment and unfulfilled dreams. Each wrinkle represented a choice he'd made, the hopes he had let slip, much like grains of sand through cautious fingers. Today, however, was different. Today, he felt a flicker of something beneath the surface, an ember fighting against the tide of doubt. He would not let the shadows claim him. Jake took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with resolve as he gathered his materials, a breakdown of his project, scribbled notes on how he planned to reignite passion in his students, the very souls of a generation that felt lost. Each page was a reminder that while he could not control the bureaucracy surrounding education, he could control how he chose to respond to it. Stoicism was not just theoretical, it was practical application. He needed to embrace that in this moment. As he arrived at the school, the worn building loomed large, an echo of the past and deeply entrenched routines. It brought forth an uneasy nostalgia, but today's task transcended those feelings. He wasn't just stepping into a battle of wills with the administration, he was stepping into a confrontation with his own fears and self-doubt. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, punctuated with the sound of softly murmured conversations. Jake found himself in a waiting room filled with teachers and parents. Each face reflected varying degrees of worry, some glancing at their phones while others exchanged hushed words, all seemingly tethered to unspoken fears. He felt an odd kinship with them in that collective uncertainty. Yet he understood that his journey was uniquely his, rooted in the desire to create positive change. As his name was called, he walked through the double doors into a cavernous meeting room where the board sat like an impenetrable fortress. Rows of chairs were neatly lined, but his heart raced in the echoing silence that enveloped him. He stood, momentarily confronted by their expectant eyes, a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," he began, his voice steady but raw with passion. As he presented his ideas, piecing together his vision, a newfound sense of clarity emerged. Each glance from the board fed his courage, even if their expressions appeared dismissive. "The lessons we impart today can mold the character of our students for tomorrow. Isn't that our highest calling?" The words propelled him forward against the dull weight of their initial dismissal. He expanded on how empowering them with empathy and collaboration could create a ripple effect, one that would teach them not only to learn but to engage with the world around them. As he concluded, silence reigned, it stretched like a taut string, ready to snap at the next word. He noticed the school principal leaning back, arms crossed tightly, a fortress in his own right. Uncertainty swirled, but he held firm in the moment, allowing his honesty to temper the tension. "I'm not asking for permission to break traditions," he emphasized. "I'm asking for a chance to breathe life into our students. To remind them that education is more than grades and test scores, it's about becoming better human beings." The principal shifted in his seat, the moment molding into tangible possibility. Yet, doubt lingered like an unwanted guest. Would they see the value of his proposition, or would it be dismissed? Just as he braced himself for their response, a sharp intake of breath caught his attention. The time had come to face the judges of his fate. A murmur broke the silence, and Jake's heart seized momentarily. It wasn't just the board's response he awaited, it was the culmination of every decision he had made that had led him here. The principal leaned forward, narrowing his eyes as if trying to penetrate the layers of Jake's convictions. "Mr. Hart, you're proposing a radical shift in our educational approach. How do you intend to implement these changes given the existing frameworks?" The question hung heavily, and Jake felt exposed. This was the pivotal moment, the challenge that demanded not just an answer but an unwavering vision. He fortified his resolve, thinking about the very essence of what he stood for, not merely to teach, but to inspire and cultivate a future generation capable of meaningful engagement. "I envision a pilot program," Jake responded, steadiness returning to his voice with each word. "A 2-month initiative where we can integrate collaborative projects, community service, and real-world problem-solving into our curriculum. We will not only assess academic achievement but also emotional intelligence, resilience, and social skills." The board's scrutiny deepened, and he sensed their hesitation. To project hope amidst their skepticism, he recalled how much he valued the moments in his classroom when a student's eyes lit up with understanding. He yearned to recreate that enlightenment on a broader scale. One board member interjected, tone sharp as a blade. "And what makes you think students are ready for this? Aren't you betting on their ability to engage with material that demands critical thinking and emotional depth?" That voice struck a chord of doubt within him, questions he'd asked himself countless times resurfaced. Was he overestimating their readiness? Jake had witnessed firsthand how marginalized and disillusioned students could become when faced with rigid systems. They were capable of flourishing, even in the smallest ways, if only given the right environment. In that pivotal moment, Jake felt a wave of clarity washing over him. With the right support, these students will rise to the challenge, he asserted, his tone gaining gravitas. "I've seen them thrive when their voices are heard and valued. This initiative is not just about teaching, it's about learning to be human in a complicated world." The silence that followed was not just a lull, it was weighty with contemplation. Jake used the time to recenter himself, recalling the teachings that had shaped his philosophy. Embracing vulnerability had become his strength, and though he felt exposed, he had to believe in the worth of his passions. Just as he imagined the board shifting, opening their minds to the possibilities, the principal raised a hand, an unspoken command to listen. "You speak with conviction, Mr. Hart," he admitted, voice softening. "We will consider your proposal, but understand that we are bound by many restrictions." Relief washed over Jake momentarily, but it came with a thudding realization of the uphill battle. Bound by bureaucracy, or not, he felt a spark of empowerment. The lines etched on his forehead were still there, but they now felt less like scars of defeat and more like trophies of resilience, and then came the concluding statement, delivered with a lingering weight. "You have our attention, but I advise you to prepare yourself for pushback. Change is never easy." As the meeting adjourned, Jake stepped back into the hall, each breath filling him with newfound strength and the weight of a potential road ahead. Yet he knew that this was just the beginning, but what he didn't know was that the true challenge was still awaiting him, one that would require him to confront not only systemic resistance but also the darker corners of his own aspiration. Jake stood in the aftermath of the meeting, his pulse echoing with the remnants of adrenaline. The air felt thick with anticipation, and an unsettling mix of excitement and uncertainty churned within him. His proposal, while seen as audacious, had ignited something dormant in him, a fierce desire to not only challenge the status quo but to truly transform the educational landscape for his students. Yet, as he leaned against the cold, tiled wall of the hallway, doubt crept in, clawing at his resolve. Were the board members truly ready to embrace such a shift? He imagined their reactions when the inevitable pushback surfaced. How would they react to his vision when caught between their responsibilities and a framework that had defined their career paths for so long? This was more than just a professional leap. Jake realized it was a personal journey. He had spent years in the classroom, watching students struggle against complacency, their creativity snuffed out by an unyielding curriculum. Now, he stood at the threshold of potential greatness, except the weight of self-doubt threatened to eclipse his ambition. He clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up. What if he faltered? What if he miscalculated the readiness of his students? The voices that echoed through the boardroom seemed to swirl and merge with his inner critic, drowning out the resolute assertions he had made just moments ago. Then you adapt, he thought. You do what you need to do to make them see. The resolve solidified. He could not afford to retreat now. This was the moment that could not only redefine his career but also rekindle the spark in his students. Hastily, Jake strolled to his classroom, determination coursing through him. As he entered, the familiar comfort of the room enveloped him. Here, he felt most at home, the organized chaos of desks, the colorful posters on the walls, the carefully salvaged artifacts from past projects littered around. This sanctuary was where ideas flourished, where he had forged connections that transcended mere educational obligations. Jake sank into the worn chair at his desk, the sunlight filtering through the blinds casting warm patterns on the old oak surface. He pulled out a notebook, the very one filled with ideas and rough drafts for his proposed pilot program. Each scribble represented intentions, hopes, and a dream that felt increasingly tangible. He began to plan meticulously, imagining how he could launch the initiative despite the restrictions outlined by the board. Brainstorming pathways for engagement became a zealous endeavor. Collaborative projects designed around students' interests surged forth: local environmental issues, cultural explorations, community storytelling. Jake saw students working alongside community leaders, fostering connections that could redefine their perspectives. This wasn't just teaching. It was cultivating relationships, breathing life into education. Yet, another voice nagged at him: what about the experience and authority of those who had come before him? Could he truly navigate these entrenched systems distanced from creativity? Jake took a deep breath, reminding himself that change was always met with resistance. Realization dawned: he needed allies. He envisioned conversations with fellow educators, discussions that would refine and validate his approach. Perhaps he could draw on the very community he sought to energize within the classroom, a network of support. Navigating institutional resistance would not just be his struggle, it had to be collective. The anticipation of what lay ahead buzzed like a live wire. Was he ready to confront not just the skepticism of the board but also any doubts within himself? The answer had to be yes. As he put pen to paper, outlining potential engagement strategies, a surge of clarity ignited his purpose. He caught a glimpse of the obstacles ahead but felt fortified against them. Jake stood, a newfound confidence propelling him forward. The moment to broadcast his vision was inching closer, and he couldn't back down. But, amidst his planning and conviction, he realized he had yet to confront the most pressing question: how would he respond when those he admired questioned his vision? With a sense of urgency, Jake knew he had to prepare not only for the excitement of innovative change but also for the inevitable clash with long-standing beliefs. The time had come to face not just the board or the system, but also the voices of experience that might challenge him. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he laid out the notebook on his desk, the pages filled with sketches of ideas and plans yet to be realized. The classroom hummed with the faint whispers of what could be, sending shivers of anticipation down his spine. Today, he resolved, would not be another day spent merely teaching. It would be a day of action, a day where he would begin to implement the beginnings of his vision. He rose from his desk, pacing the room, trying to harness the restless energy surging within him. The barren walls held echoes of a traditional curriculum, and Jake felt an aching need to paint them with colors of innovation. Each step he took felt like a small rebellion against the monotony that had gripped education for too long. Jake had always been a natural educator, charismatic, engaging, able to connect. But now, he recognized the need to evolve beyond these qualities. He was stepping into a realm that demanded more than charisma. It required courage, strategic foresight, and the willingness to face those who might oppose him. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that this was not solely about his proposal. It was tied to his identity as an educator. Would he allow years of institutional inertia to silence his ambitions? No, he decided firmly. He would stand firm, reflecting on the true depth of his conviction. Determined to forge meaningful connections with his colleagues, he drafted an email that would ignite discussions among them, inviting everyone to brainstorm collaborative ideas for the program. He hesitated, hovering over the send button. What if they laughed at his proposition? What if they deemed it unworthy of serious consideration? He pushed the thoughts aside, recognizing them for what they were: unproductive distractions. He clicked send and felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. There was no turning back. He had set the wheels of change in motion. With his heart racing, Jake made a decision. He would hold an open forum next week, an opportunity for his students to voice their opinions on his preliminary ideas. He scrawled down the details, thinking of how invigorating it would be to hear fresh and diverse perspectives. Encouraging them to speak up would not only empower them but also strengthen his resolve against potential pushback from the board. The students were his lifeblood, and he felt their potential surging invisibly through the very walls he now propped against. If they were to anchor his initiative, they needed to feel invested, to witness their ideas woven into the fabric of his plan. He called out to them, asking them to not just be recipients of knowledge but active participants in their education. Could he tap into their passion? Their creativity? He would find out. As the anticipation of the open forum mingled with newfound hope, he focused on his preparation. Each lesson would incorporate elements of their culture, their interests, and the things they lived. How could learning be authentic if it didn't resonate with their lives? Every syllable he prepared became infused with purpose, igniting his excitement. In the midst of his preparations, a moment of clarity washed over him. He had to be prepared for opposition. The veterans, those who had seasoned their expertise through years of teaching in rigid systems, would raise questions. Their skepticism would be natural, unavoidable. He pulled out a fresh sheet. It was time to think critically about how he would respond. How would he defend his vision against the kind of institutional pushback he feared? What arguments could he construct to bolster his stance? As he scribbled down potential objections alongside his responses, the enthusiasm he felt moments ago began to transform into a simmering intensity. Was he ready for this? Would he have the fortitude to face those who would scrutinize and doubt? The questions whirled in his mind like a restless storm. Deep down, he felt a dawning realization about his own growth. It wasn't about the program alone, it was about confronting his apprehensions. Each point of contention would serve as a chance for him to clarify his vision, to bolster his arguments and prepare for the scrutiny ahead. Jake stared out the window at golden leaves swirling down in the autumn breeze. He was no longer just a teacher, he was becoming an architect of change in the world of education. building a future that would not rest on outdated foundations. And with that thought, he understood one crucial truth: change never came easy. He would have to face the very people whose shadows loomed over his aspirations. The following days loomed ahead, and he could feel the comforting embrace of determination mixed with anxiety. Anxiety beckoned like an old friend, whispering doubts into his ear, but the fire of his purpose burned more brightly. What had he forgotten to consider? As he prepped for the forum, a flutter of uncertainty crept in. Were his arguments solid enough? Would he be enough in this moment of reckoning? With resolve boiling beneath his skin, Jake knew he had to prepare for his moment, whatever form it may take. He would stand before his colleagues, before the board, before the very essence of what he was striving to change. The day was rapidly approaching when he would confront not merely adversity, but himself. And deeply embedded within the pressure of his upcoming challenges lingered one haunting question: could he summon the courage to stand firm in his belief when faced with unwavering opposition? The morning of the open forum dawned, and Jake rose with a mixture of anticipation and nerves bubbling within him. He could hear the distant sounds of students chatting outside his classroom, their youthful enthusiasm a bittersweet reminder of the very energy he sought to harness. With every step he took toward his desk, the weight of the impending confrontation pressed down upon him. He couldn't afford to falter. Today was not just about sharing ideas, today was about proving to himself that he could transform not only his classroom but his approach to education itself. He looked around at the blank walls, the frozen reminders of stale practices. They screamed for relevance, for the vibrancy he longed to infuse into his lessons. Would his colleagues be able to see that? Would they recognize the urgency for change? These questions looped in his mind, demanding answers he didn't yet have. As the clock ticked closer to the starting time, Jake's heart raced against the backdrop of uncertainty. In a last-minute surge of efficiency, he jotted down critical talking points onto a cue card, his mind shifting between the points of inspiration he wanted to impart and the challenges he faced. He could feel the skepticism of the older teachers looming just beyond the threshold, casting shadows over his determination. He steeled himself, breathing deeply as students filed into the classroom, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. The room began to fill with their energy, and he felt a glimmer of hope ignite within. They were eager to contribute, to be heard. It was precisely this spirit he intended to cultivate. "Thank you all for coming," he began cautiously, but the moment he saw their attentive faces, the words tumbled out with more confidence. He explained not only his vision for the program but also his earnest desire to involve them intimately in the process. Their thoughts would help shape the framework, he told them, and in doing so, create a learning environment that was relevant to their lives. As he spoke, Jake observed hands rise eagerly, voices chiming in with thoughts that turned mere ideas into a vibrant conversation. It was exhilarating, witnessing them articulate insights he hadn't even considered. Yet, in the back of his mind loomed the voices of his older colleagues, the doubt that crawled over his thoughts like a dark fog. How would they react to these radical perspectives? After an hour of dynamic engagement, he decided to initiate a brainstorming session, splitting the students into small groups to refine their ideas into actionable concepts. As they enthusiastically discussed their proposals, Jake sensed a shift within himself. Each idea they shared felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something meaningful, a bridge connecting their experiences with the learning environment he sought to transform. But there was an underlying current of tension. The dismissal bell rang, and a few students lingered, eager to share additional thoughts. It was a reminder that this was only the beginning. The real test still awaited him in the boardroom, with those who sought education as a rigid pathway rather than the fluid journey it had the potential to be. Jake returned to his desk, glancing down at his notes filled with scribbled ideas. The enthusiasm he felt in the forum sparked something deeper within him. Yet he also felt the echo of his earlier fears. Could he defend these students' voices against the bureaucratic barriers? That urgency intensified his resolve to prepare for the scrutiny that would inevitably come when pitching these concepts to the faculty. In his reflective moment, he recognized what he could leverage moving forward. His students' voices were not merely sentiments, they were powerful testimonies of engagement and relevance in learning. They were his strength, and he would channel their excitement as formidable leverage in the face of potential opposition. Still, the looming challenge gnawed at him. If his colleagues paid more attention to tradition than innovation, would he be ready to articulate the need for a change so drastically? Could he shift their perspective in a way that would compel them to rethink their own practices? The answer seemed elusive, yet Jake felt a pull toward clarity. He needed to ground his vision in tangible outcomes, not just abstract ideals. The upcoming meeting with the board wasn't the end, it was a chance to wield this transformation, to redefine success beyond standardized measures. Jake pored over his notes late into the night, questioning his motives and refining his arguments. It was in that crucible of introspection that a nagging thought emerged: how could he defend the indefensible for the sake of growth? As dawn broke, illuminating the walls he had once wanted to erase, Jake sat up in bed realizing a vital truth. What if he presented his vision not just as a program but as a critical necessity for an evolving educational landscape? What if he shifted the narrative entirely? He smiled at that thought, one that hinted at a turning point. Could he confront the veteran teachers, the skeptics, with this newfound understanding and unshakable resolve? The time was drawing near for him to step into that arena, where ideals would clash against tradition. With his heart thumping in anticipation, Jake took a deep breath, fully aware of one undeniable truth: change was imminent, but the true question remained: would he be able to harness it before it swept him away? Jake stood in front of the boardroom, his palms slightly damp against the edge of the podium. The sterile environment around him felt alien, almost suffocating. The walls were adorned with achievements of the past, a stark reminder of what his colleagues considered success. He had rehearsed for this moment countless times, yet the anticipation and doubt tangled together like a knotted string in his stomach. Was he truly prepared to challenge the norms that had governed this place for so long? Taking a deep breath, he scanned the room, noting the familiar faces of his colleagues. Some looked skeptical, others indifferent, but he could see a few who seemed genuinely curious. Building on that flicker of hope, Jake began with a story he'd connected to the upcoming initiatives, a tale of one of his students who had transformed her struggles into an avenue for innovation. As he spoke, he let the narrative weave its magic, his voice gaining strength with each syllable. These were not just changes he sought, they were necessary advancements that even the most reluctant educator could recognize as vital. But as his words filled the air, he couldn't shake the feeling that behind the interest and intrigue, skepticism lurked. He had observed the dismissal of new ideas in faculty meetings before, how whispers and nods substituted for thoughtful discussion. Would they truly listen? Or would they cling to their palms pressed tightly against the walls of tradition? Jake pushed through the growing tension, his heart pounding, as questions emerged from the crowd. He welcomed the challenge, responding with passion and authenticity. Education isn't merely about imparting knowledge, it's about empowering voices, connecting experiences, and cultivating a relevant learning environment, he emphasized. Yet, with each response, he felt the weight of potential rebuttals hovering above him like a dark cloud. What if they asked how he could substantiate the value of these new methods? What if they pointed to the standardized test scores and argued that his proposals could jeopardize their long-standing successes? Eager to arm himself against incoming skepticism, Jake flipped through his prepared notes for statistics and testimonials. The narrative of students transforming their educational experiences was powerful, but would it be compelling enough against figures that represented the epitome of educational success? As the conversation grew more intense, Jake felt something shift within himself. Instead of retreating into defensiveness, he began to emphasize the collective responsibility they all shared. We have an obligation to adapt, to reflect the society we live in, where information and engagement move far beyond rigid frameworks. Our students need to prepare not just for tests but for life, a dynamic world that values innovation. This was a turning point, a revelation dawning on him. The more he spoke, the less he felt like an outsider defending an uncertain future. He felt like an advocate driven by the voices of those he taught. But as soon as he caught this surge of confidence, reality struck him again. Would his colleagues rally behind this idea, or would they dismantle it at the root, viewing it as yet another ill-fated scheme? Just then, Margaret, a veteran teacher known for her fierce dedication to tradition, raised her hand. Silence enveloped the room as all eyes turned toward her. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of neutrality that could tilt either way. While your ideas are compelling, how do you plan on measuring success differently? What if these methods don't yield the results we're accustomed to? The question sliced through the air like a knife, demanding a rooted response. Jake's heart dropped momentarily. This was exactly the confrontation he dreaded. The risk of change weighed heavily on him, precariously balanced on the precipice of his vision and the established constructs surrounding education. With the boardroom silent, each second felt like an eternity. Yet, looking into the faces around him, he remembered the hope he had seen in his students. Their eagerness echoed within him as he recalled their shared laughter and dreams for a brighter future. Maybe the question wasn't just about results, it was about igniting a passion for learning that transcended data and numbers. Jake straightened himself, preparing to respond, the pressure evaporating as clarity enveloped his thoughts. In that pivotal moment, he knew he would be tested not just by Margaret but by the entire faculty, and the outcome was uncertain. But with each second that ticked away, he realized that it wasn't an ending he feared but the potential of a new beginning. Could he stand firm in the light of objection, advocating for students in a way that redefined their relationship with education? As he opened his mouth to speak, the words formulated in his mind, spiraling into action. This wasn't just about teaching, it was about learning and evolution that lay at the heart of every decision. Would this be the moment where he inspired colleagues to embrace change, or would this mark the beginning of a confrontation that could set the stage for a clash of ideals? Jake gathered his breath, feeling the weight of the room shift as he prepared to address Margaret's question. Each second stretched interminably as he sought the right words, wanting to be remembered not just for his ideas but for the conviction supporting them. It wasn't just about challenging the status quo, it was about asserting a vision that echoed the heartbeats of every student he had ever taught. Success, he began, voice steadying, shouldn't be reduced to mere numbers on a standardized test. His gaze swept over the room, holding the eyes of those who showed even a spark of curiosity. Instead, we should embrace a broader definition, one that includes creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. These are the skills our students will need to navigate an unpredictable future. As he spoke, Jake felt a current of passion course through him. The timid uncertainty he had felt earlier started to dissipate into something more resolute, a clear articulation of values he had silently carried for so long. Imagine if we measure success through student engagement and the connections they make with the material. What if we track their inquiry and innovation? If we cultivate an environment where students learn to ask questions rather than just memorize answers, wouldn't that benefit them more in the long run? The murmurs in the room intensified. There were many who were nodding, perhaps in reluctant agreement. He could sense that his words were beginning to penetrate the hearts and minds of his colleagues. The interplay of hope and fear ignited something deep within Jake, a courage he wasn't sure he possessed until this moment. Margaret leaned forward, her skeptical facade cracking slightly. That sounds ideal, Jake, but what about accountability? How do we ensure that these new methods don't jeopardize our standards? Jake felt the double-edged nature of her question. It was fair but embedded with fear of losing control over what had long been considered the keystone of educational integrity. This was the very hesitation that had held him back for years. He needed to frame his response not just to convince Margaret but to sway the entire room towards a collective paradigm shift. There is an accountability to our students that can never wane, he countered, a newfound conviction lacing his words. We are responsible for fostering not just their academic skills, but also their resilience and adaptability. If our methods are preserved in a vacuum, if we remain stagnant, we risk preparing them for tests, not for life. A tense silence enveloped the room, thick with contemplation. Jake felt the weight of the contrasting forces battling within him, the fear of failure and the thrill of possibility. He realized that he was not just advocating for change, he was expressing an urgent need for revolution in education, a deep resonance with the very ethos he'd felt growing inside him since he first entered the field. Yet uncertainty still hovered. Would they truly comprehend the significance of his vision? Would they understand that it wasn't merely a rejection of past practices, but a commitment to every learner's potential? He gathered his strength, inviting his colleagues to envision a future molded by their shared commitment to develop empowered individuals who can adapt and thrive. Just then, another voice piped up from the back, a younger teacher, one whose enthusiasm for progressive methods had been bubbling beneath the surface. I agree with Jake, she said, her voice unwavering. We need to meet our students where they are and guide them to where they need to go using methods I've seen work in my classroom. It's about embracing change, not fearing it. Jake felt the surge of camaraderie zip through him, igniting something fierce. Here was an ally, someone who understood the stakes and the potential that lay in shifting their practices. The reaction from the room was mixed, though there were still glaring eyes of dissent among some of the senior staff. With the momentum finally building, he took a step forward. He could no longer afford to retreat into uncertainty or apologize for pushing boundaries. Courage bubbled up again, coursing through his veins. Let us challenge ourselves. What if we took a leap of faith together? What can we accomplish if we stand united in this vision for our students, committed to their dynamic growth? As Jake's words hung in the air, he could feel the palpable shift, the room vibrating with energy sparked by possibility. For the first time, instead of thinking about their rejection of his ideas, he thought about their potential embrace. The moment was becoming a defining juncture not just for him, but for the very institution he had hoped to uplift. But just as he allowed hope to ascend within him, he caught sight of Margaret's unyielding expression, the embodiment of resistance against change. The path ahead still seemed fraught with challenges, and Jake sensed that this struggle was just beginning. How could he continue to make these changes resonate, bridge the gaps between generations of educators, and find common ground when there seemed to be a divide so wide? The stage was set for a powerful confrontation, one that could either solidify his vision or dismantle it entirely. With his heart racing, Jake knew the moment had come to face the depths of their beliefs, his and theirs. Would they choose to evolve, or would they choose to cling to the past? Jake's resolve deepened, sensing the gravity of the moment as a hush fell over the assembled faculty. He stood at the precipice of his ambition, vulnerable yet resolute. It was no longer about mere ideas, it was about instilling a belief system strong enough to withstand challenges from within. He took a breath, and the air felt electric, rich with uncertainty. He had leaned into the urgency of his mission, but as the silence engulfed him, he felt the juxtaposition of hope and trepidation. In that moment, he recognized that confidence was not the absence of fear, it was the determination to move forward despite it. What if we abandoned the fear of what could go wrong, he proposed, voice steady, and instead embraced the potential for what could go right? Turning to Margaret, Jake attempted to tap into a shared conviction that perhaps lay dormant in her, caught beneath layers of skepticism. I understand the need for structure and accountability. But structure shouldn't stifle creativity, it should be its backbone. Can we create a framework for evaluation that's more authentic? One that measures progress, not just performance? Margaret's brows knitted together as she absorbed his words, her gaze unwavering. That's idealistic, she replied, but Jake detected a hint of curiosity threading through her skepticism. You cannot ignore the requirements we face. Our students' futures hinge on these tests that were designed for a different era, Jake interjected, feeling a surge of urgency. We are no longer merely educating for a standard, we are preparing our students for a world that will demand they innovate and adapt. That world is here. Around the room, he saw nods from some who shared his views, while others were evidently wrestling with the shift. It was clear now that he had ignited a spark, one that could either build into a blaze of transformation or fizzle into apathy. Looking at the younger teacher who had backed him, he saw the glimmer of hope reflected in her expression, and it bolstered him. What if instead of merely teaching content, we teach adaptability? What if we assess our students on their ability to critique, create, and collaborate? Jake pressed on, leaning into the palpable tension. That can't possibly lead us down a worse path than the one we're currently on. A moment of silence hung in the room, thick with contemplation. Suddenly, another voice, more timid but steadily rising, joined the conversation. That sounds risky, an older teacher near the front warned, unease etched on their face. What if it fails? Jake felt a flicker of frustration at their unwillingness to entertain the notion of risk. What if it succeeds? What if we discover untapped potential in our students, new passions that drive them? Winning their hearts and minds can't be a failure. A palpable shift coursed through the room, interspersed with murmurs of agreement and dissent. At that moment, Jake realized this gathering was a microcosm of the larger challenge he faced, navigating a tectonic shift in educational philosophy. But the stakes were much more than just professional, they were personal. Jake recognized that this was not merely about methodologies, it was a reflection of his beliefs. He had been an educator for years, yet somehow felt like a novice, stepping into an arena laden with challenges and conflicts. The fear that gripped him, the fear of rejection, of standing alone, threatened to immobilize him. He could either fade back into his role as a silent participant or embrace this moment entirely. His voice trembled, the crack in his bravado revealing his vulnerability, but he pressed on. If we think about what's at stake, our students' futures, can we truly afford to maintain the status quo? We owe it to them to explore new paths, even if it seems daunting. Change is not comfortable, yet it's necessary. With those words, Jake felt something shift within himself. A bravery that he had never fully embraced began to take root, compelling him to take the leap into uncharted territory. The collective spirit of the room now clashed against his notion of boundary and tradition, a wrestling match between safety and innovation. Yet amid this ideological clash, he spotted Margaret's expression again, her brows furrowing in thought as she grappled with the implications of his fervor. A glimmer of something melted the ice encasing her resolve, and she raised a hand slowly. What would that even look like in practice? She asked, the hesitant inquiry a vehicle for possibility rather than resistance. Jake's heart raced. It was a moment of potential reconciliation, a turning point underscored by a rising tide of acceptance. Every teacher in that room suddenly felt like they stood at a crossroad, with paths ahead diverging into the methodologies of yesterday or the promises of tomorrow, but a lingering doubt shadowed his hopes. Was he truly equipped to lead this charge? Did he possess the knowledge and strategies needed to fulfill the promise of a new educational paradigm? Ready to answer Margaret's challenge head-on, Jake felt a warm rush of determination. As he grasped the direction of his own thoughts and ideas, a question burned within him more fiercely than before. Was he prepared to face his own insecurities and evolve throughout this entire journey? It was clear that the battle was only beginning as he stood on the edge of something transformative. Would he be able to harness the commitment of his colleagues and turn this shift into reality? The answer waited just beyond the horizon, in both the classroom and within his own heart. Days turned into weeks, and Jake Thompson plunged headfirst into the flood of changes his educational vision demanded. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted. While there remained pockets of resistance, a growing consensus emerged. Teachers, previously rooted in tradition, began to recognize the burgeoning potential Jake had articulated. He nurtured alliances with like-minded educators, gathering momentum for his pilot program, which was lovingly dubbed the Empowerment Project. The engagement sessions had transformed into powerful workshops where students took center stage, sharing ideas, debating methodologies, and showcasing their curiosity. Jake had harnessed the energy of collective voices, instilling a sense of ownership among students unlike anything he had experienced in his career. They were no longer passive recipients of knowledge, they were collaborators in an educational revolution. The classroom felt electric, vibrant with possibilities. During one pivotal workshop, a student named Maya stood up and confidently proposed a community project that bridged history and art. Let us create a mural that tells the history of our town and includes everyone's story. It'll be our legacy. Her words ignited fervor among her classmates, a mix of excitement and pride rippling through the room. In that moment, Jake realized that this was the embodiment of his vision. Students taking charge, using creativity to forge connections to their community. Weeks of enthusiasm culminated in a presentation to the school board. As Jake prepared, the old shadows of self-doubt crept back in. What if it was merely a spark that fizzled out? But another part of him, a stronger, more resolute voice countered. You have the evidence. You've demonstrated their engagement, you've shown that this is not just a pipe dream. The preparation transformed him. He walked into the boardroom with a fresh confidence that resonated in every word. The presentation was dynamic. Jake recounted stories of student achievements, their words, their growth. He showcased testimonials and video clips of students articulating their evolving perspectives about learning. The board members listened intently, their expressions softening, eyebrows raising with intrigue. After he closed with a passionate plea for the board to fully endorse the Empowerment Project, the silence was palpable. It was an anxious moment suspended in time. He peered into their skeptical eyes, but among the frowns and uncertainty, he noticed a flicker of acknowledgement. The chairman leaned forward, eyes glinting with a newly sparked curiosity, and asked, "How do you propose we evaluate success in this initiative?" Jake launched into his well-crafted response, detailing how success would be gauged through student engagement metrics, creativity assessments, and community feedback. He advocated for a holistic measurement system that reflected not only academic performance but also personal growth. The room shifted as dialogue erupted. Voices from different corners weighed in, with some endorsing the transformative potential Jake had laid out. The tide was changing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the board reached a decision. The empowerment project received their approval, but with conditions. Jake would need to present ongoing metrics of success, adapt when necessary, and most importantly prove that this endeavor was worth the investment of time and resources for the school. With a heavy weight lifted yet a new responsibility dawning, Jake felt elated. He had not just defined his path forward, he had also aligned his values with actionable promises. The approval was validation, not just of a project, but of his evolution as an educator, one who was no longer a shadow holding on to academic traditions but a beacon guiding students into the future. As the reality of the approval settled in, Jake stood in his classroom, looking at the vibrant energy pulsating within. He saw students engaged, collaborating, and thriving the way he had envisioned. The transformative journey was weaving itself into their lives. Jake, now a steward of change, felt a solid confidence take root. His professional identity wasn't just reclaimed, it was celebrated, acknowledged, and invigorated by the very students who once seemed lost. He took a deep breath, realizing that he had traversed a significant milestone. The compliance of the board was merely a stepping stone into a greater realm of potential. He had overcome the indifference of the past, confronted the bureaucracy, and emerged with an authentic understanding of what it meant to inspire. With renewed resolve, Jake stepped outside the school, the sun setting on a day he would forever remember. He was on a path he had imagined, yet now he existed within it. The challenges ahead were still present, but he felt an invigorating connection to his purpose. After all this, he realized, true education begins where creativity and compassion converge. And he just began to forge that new reality. Now, I'm calling on you. You need to subscribe now to stay updated on the most inspiring, transformative journeys. This is the moment to show your support by hitting that like button. Let us feed the algorithm with positivity. I want to hear your reactions and theories about this journey, so comment below. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who could benefit from fuel for their personal growth. This community thrives on stories that uplift.